I call the Honourable Member Darian Fenton.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'm very pleased to support the second reading of the Holidays Full Recognition of Waitangi Day and Anzac Day Bill that will restore to New Zealanders their legislated entitlement to 11 public holidays in every year rather than in 5 of every 7 years. I again congratulate my colleague David Clark for the wonderful job he's done on this, and it was a pleasure to be on the Select Committee to hear both the submissions and his input into this, and as the government member has acknowledged that he's done a very good job on that. Mr Speaker, Kiwis know a fair deal when they see one, and that's what this bill is. Poll after poll has shown that the public is behind this because it's a sensible and fair measure. Now, we'll always honour Waitangi and Anzac Day, but losing a public holiday when it falls on a weekend isn't right. It's just not fair. And so what this bill does is make sure that because that happens every 7 years, Kiwis don't miss out on their well-earned 11 public holidays every year, as in fact our public holidays legislation guarantees. Over the last 20 years, there has been more and more demands on working people for flexibility, for longer hours, while at the same time job insecurity and anxiety continues to grow. Today, increasing numbers of people are working on weekends and longer hours, as we've heard tonight, than ever before. The current situation where Anzac Day and Waitangi Day fall on a Saturday means there's an unfair situation where for 2 out of every 7 years, the public holiday entitlement, as described in the Holidays Act, is reduced. Now, I heard during the Select Committee, and some of the members of the government have expressed concerns that this bill will diminish the importance of Waitangi and Anzac Day. I don't buy that. February the 6th and April the 25th will remain as the days that the nation observes those days of special significance. In some cases, Mondayising those days will make it easier for people to participate in events like Waitangi Day or Anzac Day, and especially in the weekend if travel is required. As David Clark has said, most Australian states already Mondayise equivalent holidays, their Anzac Day and their national holiday, and there appears to have been no diminution of support for the significance of those days in Australia. In fact, you could say this bill preserves the special nature of Waitangi and Anzac Day, and there is an increasing recognition of the importance of those days in our history and identity. No one would suggest for a moment that Christmas Day has been diminished in importance by providing for Mondayisation, where it falls on a weekend, particularly for those who celebrate its religious significance. So while the arguments that we've heard have been that this bill will reduce the importance and recognition of these two national days, what I find really interesting, and that came out in the Select Committee process, is that the government have bizarrely overlooked their own legislation, the Holidays Act 2010. In that Act, Mr Speaker, the government legislated for the very thing, the same thing that government members have objected to, that is transferring the observance of a public holiday, including Waitangi and Anzac Day, to another working day. The government argued then that that was all about greater choice for employers and employees, and could be made because of the operational needs of the employer or the needs of the employee, but they appear to have changed their minds.
So the day wasn't that important?
Wasn't that important, and no one can blame us for being puzzled about that. When you go back to the original Act in 2010, or the bill, the example given in the explanatory notes said, if Waitangi Day falls on a Wednesday, an employer and a group of employees who work Monday to Friday may agree to observe Waitangi Day on the Friday. So that was given as an example in the bill. And another example was Anzac Day. So how bizarre that we had this objections from the party, from the government, when their own legislation in 2010 actually provided for Anzac Day and Waitangi Day not to be given the significance that they like to claim it has. So this government's already legislated for that in the workplace. This bill, of course, doesn't do that. It doesn't transfer the day. It recognises those days on the days they fall, and it does it in the way that Christmas Day has full recognition, Christmas Day and Boxing Day, where they fall on a weekend. So the next argument we heard during the Select Committee process was about cost. Now, there were businesses that supported the bill. There were polls among businesses. But the government did a pretty good job in financial scaremongering. The worst figure they came up with was a cost of 13 cents per worker per day. Yet their own advisors admit that that's likely to be overstated. Their quoted figures deliberately excluded the 200,000 self-employed people who aren't affected by changes to public holidays. Actually, they don't get public holidays, and that's another issue that we'd like to talk about sometime. The government also ignored the increased benefits to domestic tourism and the ability of flexible businesses to absorb and adapt to change. Most businesses already budget for 11 public holidays a year and should be able to absorb what is a very small additional cost over a 7-year period. The tourism industry made a fantastic submission. It was wonderful to hear such a progressive organisation. And I want to congratulate Martin Snedden and the industry on their submission. They came with a wonderful submission, as I said, because they could see the twin benefits of boosting domestic tourism and giving Kiwis a decent break. I find it amazing that as Minister for Tourism, John Key doesn't agree with them. He's letting his industry down. He's not listening to them. And it's time he stood beside the thousands of tourism operators who will benefit if every year, not 5 out of 7 years, Kiwis get the same number of public holidays. This bill will be a win for tourism operators right throughout the country, in the small towns and the regions, in many of the places those members over there claim to represent, and they should be listening to them. But it's also a win for hard-working Kiwis. John Key is offside on this bill with Parliament, with public opinion, and the industry he's supposed to support. And it's time he gave Kiwis a break and supported the bill, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the National Government, Labor believes that the economy should work for people and communities. And that means it's not always about cost. Progressive businesses understand that time out is important to productivity, that their workers aren't and shouldn't be slaves to the business all of the time. The National Government doesn't get that. They talk the talk. They talk and talk about work-life balance, but they don't walk the talk. When we come up with something as simple as this bill, as minor as this bill, they cannot bring themselves to support it because it would give workers a break. Their idea of flexibility is all one way. I just want to remind the House what our Holidays Act says, which says the purpose is to promote balance between work and other aspects of workers' lives. It's to give them time with their families and opportunities for rest and recreation, and it's time to celebrate public holidays for the observance of days of national, religious or cultural significance. That's what our legislation says. At the moment, that is not fully fulfilled. This bill will fulfil that purpose. Thank you.
I call the honourable member Mike Sabin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.